Over the last few months, I have completely flipped my life around trying to find the perfect computer for growing my YouTube channel as well as for everyday use. I went Windows laptop, Windows desktop, I bought my first ever Mac with the M3 Pro, bought the M3 Max, returned those, and eventually landed on the M1 Max. And you know what? This thing is sick. I'm really happy with my choice. The M3 Pro and the M3 Max were sick too, don't get me wrong, but they cost a lot more for what I would argue are very marginal upgrades. The M3 Max was better in my side-by-side tests than the M1 Max, but now that I've been using this as my main machine for a couple weeks, I can confidently say it is a fantastic machine even a couple years after release. The real difference I noticed between the Pro and the Max models were the extra video encoders the Max models offer. This really helps, well, video editing. I thought the Pro was fine with video editing, but the Max was just awesome. To be fair, the Pro I used only had 18 gigs of RAM and I think 32 is the sweet spot. So I can't say with 100% certainty that the M3 Pro with 32 gigs of RAM wouldn't have been better than the 18 gig one, but I'm confident that the extra video encoders on the Max do make a bigger difference when it comes to working on H.264 and H.265 codecs like I do. The Pros are fine for most people, but for anyone wanting to do 4K video editing, the Max is what I would recommend based on my testing. Going back to comparing the M3 and the M1 Max, the only really noticeable difference between them, besides the ray tracing stuff, which doesn't affect me, is that the M3 Max has better battery performance under load. And that's because the 3nm chips just sip power. They are so efficient with power, it's wild. It has actually made me want to learn about what's going on under the hood. So, long story short, Apple is working with TSMC, who make the best chips and have the best foundry in the world. Like, you can't just easily build semiconductor foundries, right? There's a reason why this foundry in Taiwan is so frickin' desirable by pretty much the entire world. That's another conversation. I mean, they are already cranking out 3nm chips. Intel is trying to build its own foundries to produce its chips, but from what I've heard, they're still years away, and even once they are ready to go, then they'll be at what, maybe 4nm equivalent? Yeah, Apple is that far ahead. In 2023, Intel was using their 10nm chips, even though they're trying to rebrand it like it's smaller, because the smaller it gets, the more transistors you can have and the more efficient it becomes. Look, don't quote me on my numbers or understanding. I listen to podcasts of very smart people talking about this stuff when I fall asleep. This is a very general overview of what's going on. But the point is, this M1 Max, which came out in 2021, uses 5nm technology. And even by today's standards, that's highly impressive. Years later, it doesn't feel like it's old tech. Apple is so far ahead of the competition with their ARM tech that this laptop still absolutely shreds the efficiency of the newer AMD and Intel laptops. It seems like AMD is further ahead of Intel, but we'll see what happens. Intel has just been coming out with their Meteor Lake stuff, which is their first attempt at using ARM technology, and as technology changes, it's not just about the chip size. But anyway, the more I started learning about this Apple Silicon chips, the more impressed I have become. And now, having used it for some time now, for portable power, Macs feel like they're in a league of their own when it comes to how I use computers. It needs to be said, for people who just use their laptops for email, marketplace, chatting, normal usage, I still think Windows computers are absolutely fine. You can get great deals, and that shouldn't be overlooked. But when you need a tool to do a job, like in my case, I need something to handle video editing and photo editing, this tool gets the job done without any compromises and does so in a very confidence-inspiring package. In my experience with most Windows machines, they can be better in a lot of different ways. Like maybe they'll have a sick OLED screen and a video card that's just a treat to use with that screen, but then the laptop design or the fans won't feel great and the battery will drain fast. Maybe it'll be nice and light, but it might have a flex to the build. I've never met a Windows laptop where I liked almost everything about it. This though, every day I use it, it feels like a treat to use. Everything is just good about it. The screen looks great. It has nice saturation. It's bright. The speakers are loud. The trackpad is great. It's snappy. Everything just works. The keyboard has a very satisfying feel to it. When I go back to my Windows laptop now, it just sucks to type on. It's just worse. And as far as the battery goes, I said earlier that the M3 Max battery was better while working than this M1. Like for example, if I'm gonna spend a couple hours video editing, geez, on the M3 Max, it would only use like 25%, maybe 30% of the battery for a few hour session, which is nuts. This M1 Max will use maybe 50, 55%. So I'll go from like 85% battery to 30% when I'm done, where the M3 Max would be like starting at 85% battery and then being at 60%. Crazy. But when I'm not video editing, geez, this thing will last for days. It's still that good. I was lucky enough to get a brand new battery through AppleCare before I received this laptop. So this battery is at 100% battery health, but even still at 85% battery health, it would probably be just fine. And it's funny, now I just close the screen at night when I'm done with it. I rarely shut it down, and that uses like maybe 1% of the battery overnight. It's cool. My Windows one, I was often shutting down and plugging it in. This, I barely plug it in at all, and it charges fast. The only things I really miss about Windows stuff is the gaming options. That's it. I mean, having a video card is nice for video editing with effects too, but honestly, that's not as much of a huge deal as I thought. I miss being able to install whatever Steam games I want, and you can do that on here if you really want to, but I'm actually not a big gamer, so that's fine. We have a Switch and an Xbox, plus my main games I can play on my phone or an iPad. Actually, there is one thing I don't always love about it, and that is it has a very reflective screen. In a dark room, it looks beautiful, but if you're in an environment and there's windows behind you, it's quite reflective. Mildly annoying. So in case you are considering buying a Mac like I did, maybe you're wondering if you should buy a newer M3, but like the deals of the M1 more, but you're worried that it's old tech. It's kind of not really old tech. Not when you compare it to the competition. Sure, the M2s and the M3s are better, and if you can afford them, sweet, you won't be disappointed. I just think the deals you can get for M1 chips right now should not be overlooked. And if you're rocking tech from, say, pre-COVID and want something better but don't want to spend too much money, hopefully this video will get you excited about how good any Apple Silicon chips are. Just really consider exactly what you need when you're buying a laptop. The M1 Max laptop is still just insane by today's standards. I would recommend only trying to buy something that has it. It's just nice to know that it's there. Now, while I do love the M1 Max for me, do you need the Max, or is that overkill? Here are a few things to consider when finding the right laptop for you. As far as screen sizes and models go, I wanted a laptop I could use without plugging into a monitor. The 16-inch was the biggest one that they offered, and while I was initially worried it might be too small, Apple displays are a little taller than the 15.6 Windows laptops of the past. The size is great, and I'm actually really happy with it. If I wasn't video editing, which uses a lot of screen, then I would consider a 14-inch, because the bigger ones are heavier, which would be annoying maybe for travel, but I wouldn't get a smaller one myself. I think the MacBook Airs are fantastic. That's what I would probably recommend for most people who just like having a laptop to do most tasks. I don't believe they have fans, but honestly, you rarely need them. The Pros are beefier workhorse computers with fans. They would be what you want to get when you want to do it all. The jack of all trades computer that balances battery and performance. If you want to edit videos in 4K, you can. You can kind of do whatever you want on it, but the Maxes are for the people who really don't want to waste 1 second or have any hiccups with their software. They're fantastic for working with media. And again, the M3 Maxes are on another level with ray tracing, but since I don't work with 3D, that's not important to me. For the Airs, ideally you'd want to get 16 gigs of RAM if you want to multitask on it, maybe open multiple tabs at once, maybe watch YouTube or Netflix. From what I understand, when Macs don't have enough RAM, they can use the SSD hard drives as virtual memory. It's not as fast as RAM though, and it takes its toll on the hard drive, rapidly shortening the lifespan. That's something you really want to avoid since you can't replace a hard drive on a Mac. That's why you want to get enough RAM. For the Pros and the Max chips, I'd push for at least 32 gigs of RAM and at least 512 gigs of hard drive space. For the first time in months, I'm content with my setup. I feel good about the amount of money I spent for this performance. I loved the M3s, but they just cost too much. I think the M1 Max is the perfect balance of performance versus cost. It does everything I need it to do, and I'm not waiting around wishing for anything else. This is my first real Apple purchase, and it's so good. It's made me want to learn about Apple tech, what Apple is doing and why they're crushing. And it makes me want to further invest in the ecosystem. I mean, Apple is $1 trillion company for a reason. They get it. They're making things the customers want and they make it easy to use. When people and family members ask me what laptop to buy, it's become hard for me not to instantly recommend Apple products because I know once they use it like me, they will be really happy and see that it's worth the cost. For people that are still really on a budget and don't need much, then I will still maybe recommend some of the Windows offerings. The M1 Max still isn't a cheap computer years later, but it's a lot cheaper than it was at launch, and I think the performance should still be great for years to come. Good job, Apple. As far as creator computers go, you have absolutely crushed it. Now, when it comes to tech, I'm not loyal. I'm excited to see what AMD and even what Intel is up to. Though watching their new Meteor Lake stuff compared to the M3 stuff, well, maybe it was a bit of a letdown, but competition is great. And I won't be disappointed if AMD suddenly comes out with something crushing Apple. I'll be excited. We all benefit when they push each other. I mean, Volkswagen cheating for all those years really pushed the competition to come up with all sorts of incredible hybrid and other technologies, right? Anyway, I can't wait to see what the future looks like. But for right now, I'm very happy with my M1 Max. It's nice to be able to say that. What about you? What computer are you rocking? And if it's a Windows one, would you or have you ever considered jumping ship to Apple? I mean, in a perfect world, I'd love to have a beefy desktop with a monster GPU and a MacBook to take on the go. But since I'm not financially there yet, this is the perfect spot for me. That's it for today. As always, thanks for watching, and if you can support me with a quick like to the video or a sub if you haven't already to the channel, I would really appreciate it. In case you missed this video, maybe check it out next. Otherwise, how about watching this one? We'll see you next time on The Sad Studio.